welcome back to Storytime. So this is going to be our final Storytime for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was much longer than I anticipated it being. And a lot of that was, of course, stumbling over scientific words and locations and stuff like that. But hopefully this story time will be a lot smoother since we're tying up our explorations of the world with Monsieur Anorax, Ned Land, what was his name? The Faithful Servant, I cannot remember. And of course Captain Nemo. Hang on, I'm gonna figure this out. I know that apparently Peter Lorre played the servant in the Disney. Oh, Conseil, of course. He played Conseil in the Disney movie, which I can't wait to watch again now that I know the story. And I love Peter Lorre. He's such an interesting person, plays interesting characters. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. This might actually be a short stream, but then we'll switch over to a gaming stream, and I'll see if Mr. Multi is on, then the stream that we switch over to will be Deponia, and if he's not on, we'll switch to something else, but we'll get to that, when we reach the end of Storytime. Anyways. Chapter 19, The Gulf Stream. None of us will ever forget that terrible scene of the 20th April. I have written the account of it under excitement, but since I have revised the description and read it to Ned and Conseil, they found it quite correct as to fact, but wanting in effect. To describe such incidents properly, one must have the pen of the most illustrious of our poets, the author of The Toilers of the Sea. I have stated that Captain Nemo was much affected while regarding the waves. His grief was intense. This was the second companion he had lost since our arrival on board. What a death, too. Hey, Marius, how are you doing? A friend stifled, crushed, and bruised in the formidable arms of an octopus and pounded between his iron mandibles could never repose with his messmates in the peaceful waters of the coral cemetery. The cry of despair uttered by the unhappy sailor was still ringing in my ears. This poor Frenchman, oblivious of his conventional dialect, was constrained to speak his mother tongue in a last appeal for help. I'm doing all right. Thank you. I'll chat a little bit more at chapter break. Amongst the crew of the Nautilus, linked body and soul with Captain Nemo, flying with him any contact with mankind, I had had a fellow countryman. Was he the only representative of France in this mysterious association evidently composed of individuals of different nationalities? This was one of those unsolvable problems that were continually agitating my mind. Captain Nemo entered his own room, and I did not see him again for some days. But that he was ill and careless and irresolute, I could perceive, as the ship of which he was the soul received all its impressions from him. The Nautilus did not maintain the fixed direction. It moved and floated like a corpse tossed by the waves. The screw had been disconnected, and so was no use. We steered at random, and could not get away from the neighborhood of our late encounter from those very waves that engulfed our friend. 10 days passed in this manner, and the 1st May arrived ere the Nautilus actually resumed her old course, having sighted the Bahamas. We then followed the current of the greatest river of the sea, which has its own banks, its fish, and temperature. I mean the Gulf Stream. It is, in fact, the river which runs freely to the middle of the Atlantic, and whose waters do not mingle with any ocean waves. It is a salt river, more salt than the sea surrounding it. Its average depth is 3,000 feet. Its average breadth, 60 miles. In certain places, the current runs at the rate of nearly 3 miles an hour. The unvarying volume of its water is greater than that of all the rivers of the globe. The true source of the Gulf Stream, discovered by Commander Maury, its point of departure, if you prefer the term, is in the Gulf of Gascony. There its waters, feeble in color and temperature, commence to form. It descends to the south by equatorial Africa, warms itself in the rays of the torrid zone, crosses the Atlantic, touches Cape San Roque on the Brazilian coast, and divides. One branch goes to be again warmed by the waters of the Antilles. Then the Gulf Stream, charged to reestablish the temperature and to mingle the waters of the tropics with the northern seas, commences to play its part of intermediary. Warmed to a great heat in the Gulf of Mexico, it runs along the American coast nearby to Newfoundland, deviates under pressure from a cold current from Davis Strait, resumes the ocean route, followed the Loxodromic Line, one of the great circles of the globe, divides into two branches about the 43rd degree. One arm, assisted by the northeast trade wind, returns to the Gulf of Gascony and to the Azores, while the other, having laved the coasts of Ireland and Norway, flows as far as Spitsbergen, where its temperature falls to 4 degrees to form the open polar sea. It was this ocean river that the Nautilus then entered, at the mouth of the Bahama Canal, about 14 leagues out, and 350 yards deep. The Gulf Stream flows at the rate of 5 miles an hour. This pace decreases regularly in proportion as it advances towards the north, and it is to be hoped that this regularity may continue. For if its direction and pace undergo any alteration, the disturbances to European climates would involve very serious consequences. Towards noon, I was with Conseil upon the platform. I gave him some particulars relative to the Gulf Stream. When I had finished, I suggested his putting his hand into the water. He did so, and was surprised not to perceive any sensation either of heat or cold. That is, I said, because the temperature of the waters of the Gulf Stream, when leaving the Gulf of Mexico, is very little different from that of the blood. This Gulf Stream is a vast conductor of warmth, which clothes the coasts of Europe with verdure. And if we may credit Maury, the aggregate temperature of its waters would supply sufficient heat to hold in fusion a river of molten iron as large as the Amazon or the Missouri. At this time, the speed of the Gulf Stream was 2.25 yards per second. Its current is so distinct from the surrounding sea that its compressed waters mingle with the ocean waves. Darker than the others and richer in saline matter, the waves of the Gulf Stream trace their course in pure indigo, amid the green waters around them. Such is the distinctness of the line of demarcation that the Nautilus, at the latitude of the Carolines, separated the waters of the Gulf Stream with her prow, while the screw revolved in those of the ocean. The current carried with it all kinds of living things. Argonauts, so common in the Mediterranean, were here sailing in fleets. Amongst cartilaginous fishes, the most remarkable were the rays, the slender tails constituting nearly 1/3 of their bodies, and looked like large lozenges, 25 feet long. Small sharks, a yard in length, large heads, muzzles short and rounded, pointed teeth arranged in several rows, and very scaly bodies. Amongst the bony fishes I noted the gray goby, particular in this region, the black gilt head, the eyes of which sparkled like fire. Sirens, a yard long, with large mouths filled with little teeth. These teeth uttered low cries. Blue coryphenes, striped with gold and silver, parrotfish, true ocean rainbows, which could rival the most splendid tropical birds in color, triangular-headed blennies, blue romes, denuded of scales, bactricoids covered with yellow transversal bands, something like the Greek letter T, little gobies in crowds, dipterus with silver heads and yellow tails, salmon, mugillamores, slender and shining with a soft radiance, which Lacipede consecrated with its to his amiable wife, and finally a large fish called the American chevalier, which, decorated with many orders and covered with ribands, frequents the coasts of the great nation where ribands and orders are so very lightly esteemed. I may add that during the night the phosphorescent waters of the Gulf Stream rivaled our own electric light, particularly during stormy weather. So on the 8th May we passed Cape Hatteras. The width of the Gulf Stream is here 75 miles, its depth 210 yards. The Nautilus still sailed at random. All supervision seemed suspended on board. I began to consider that under these circumstances escape was possible. The inhabited coasts offered us many easy refuge. Steamers from New York or Boston were continually passing on their way to the Gulf of Mexico, and night and day pretty little schooners were darting from point to point of the American coast. We might really hope to be picked up. This was, therefore, a favorable occasion, notwithstanding the 30 miles of water that separated the Nautilus from the United States. But an untoward circumstances balked the plans of Ned Land. The weather was very bad. We were approaching latitudes where storms are frequent, the district of waterspouts and cyclones engendered by the currents of the Gulf Stream. To launch upon a tempestuous sea in a frail boat was to court certain destruction. Ned Land even confessed as much, so he fretted himself into a regular attack of homesickness, which flight only could cure. "Monsieur," said he one day, "this must come to an end somehow. I wish to make a clean breast of it. Your Nemo is quitting land and going north, but I declare that I had enough of the South Pole, and I will not go up to the North Pole as well." "But what are we to do, Ned Land, since flight at present is impracticable?" I come back to my original notion. We must speak to the captain. You said nothing when we were in your national seas. I wish to speak now that we are in mine. When I consider that in a few days the Nautilus will be close to Nova Scotia, and near Newfoundland is a large bay into which the St. Lawrence flows, and that the St. Lawrence is my river, the river of Quebec, my native town. When I think of all this, I get angry. It makes my hair stand on end with rage, and I would rather throw myself into the sea than stay here." The Canadian was fast losing patience. His vigorous manhood could not brook his prolonged imprisonment. His appearance was daily altered. His temperament became morose. I knew what he was suffering, for I began to have a touch of that homesickness. Nearly 7 months had elapsed, and we had had no news from Earth. Further, the isolation of Captain Nemo, his changed habits, particularly since our encounter with the cuttlefish, his taciturnity, gave all things a very different appearance. I no longer looked at things with my former enthusiasm. One must be a Fleming like Conseil to adapt oneself to the present circumstances in this water, reserved for cetacea and such like animals. Indeed, had Conseil been furnished with gills instead of lungs, I believe he would have taken a high position amongst fishes. "Well, sir," I said, Ned, said Ned, perceiving I did not answer. "Well, do you wish me to ask Captain Nemo what are his intentions concerning us?" "Yes, sir." "Even though he has already made them known?" "Yes, I should like the matter to be decided. Speak for me in my name only if you prefer to do so." "But I so seldom meet him. He even avoids me. All the greater reason to go and see him." "I will ask him, Ned." "When?" "Whenever I meet him." "Monsieur Enerax, I shall go and see him shall I go and see him myself?" "No, let me do it. Tomorrow. Today, said Ned. Well, then today be it. I will go and see him, I replied. Had the Canadian gone and got angry, everything would have been compromised. I was alone. As it had been decided I was to ask, the sooner it was done, the better. I entered my own room, whence I meant to go to Captain Nemo's cabin. I must not permit this opportunity to escape. I knocked. No answer being given, I knocked again. Then I turned the handle and entered. The captain was in his room. Bending over his work, he had not heard me. Determined not to leave without asking him the question, I approached him. He raised his head, suddenly frowned, and said in a rude tone, "You here, what do you want?" "To speak to you, Captain." "But I am engaged, I am at work." "You can be private if you choose. Cannot I have some privilege?" This reception was not very encouraging, but I was determined to hear all, to answer all. "Yes," said I coldly, "I have to speak to you of a matter that will not admit of delay." "What is it?" he said ironically. "Have you made some discovery that has escaped me? Has the sea revealed any new secret to you?" We were at cross purposes, but before I could reply, he said gravely, "Monsieur Anorax, here is an MS, written in several languages. It contains the digest of ray studies beneath the sea, and please goodness it will not perish with me. This MS, signed by me, completed by the history of my life, will be enclosed in a small, unsinkable case. The last survivor of all of us on board the Nautilus will throw this into the sea, and it will go whithersoever the waves may carry it. The name of this man, his history written by himself. The mystery shall then be dissolved some day, but at the moment I only saw in his communication an opening to my business." "Captain," I replied, "I can but approve your resolve. It is not right that the result of your studies should be lost, but the means you intend to employ are primitive. Who knows where the wind may carry your work, or into whose hands it may fall? Cannot you devise something better? Cannot you or one of your—" "Never, sir," he cried, hastily interrupting me. "But I and my companions are willing to take care of this MS, and if you set us at liberty—" "At liberty!" exclaimed Captain Nemo, rising. "Yes, and it is upon this subject I came to speak to you. For 7 months we have been on board, and I ask today, in my companions' names, as well as my own, whether you intend to continue us here forever. Confine us here forever. Monsieur Anorax, I will reply to you today as I replied to you 7 months ago. Whoever enters the Nautilus must never leave it. But this is slavery you would impose. You may give it any name you please. But in every country, a slave reserves the right to regain his liberty by whatever means he can. And who has denied you this right? Have I ever bound you by any oath?" said the captain, folding his arms, regarding me steadfastly. "Captain Nemo," said I, "to revert to this subject will not be to the taste of either of us, but as we have once entered upon it, let us go through with it. I repeat, it is not only for myself, for my studies are a relaxation, a passion that swallows up all other thoughts. Like yourself, I am one to live unnoticed, obscure, in the distant hope of bequeathing the result of my work to a future age. In a work I can admire you. You have given up a line that I can understand in certain points, but there are other aspects to your life, surrounded by mysteries and complications, in which I and my companions can take no part. And even when our hearts have been moved by your sorrow, or excited by your acts of genius or courage, we have been obliged to repel any expression of sympathy, however small, which is born at the sight of brave or good actions in a friend or enemy. Well, this feeling that we are strangers to everything about you makes our position unaccepted, impossible even for me, and above all for Ned Land. Every man worthy of the name of man deserves consideration. Have you ever told yourself that love of liberty, hatred of servitude can give rise to projects of revenge in such a nature as the Canadian's, that he can think, attempt, but in execution? I was silenced by the captain, who rose and said, Ned Land may think, attempt, or put in execution what he pleases. What does it matter to me? It was not I who sought him. It is not for my pleasure that he remains on board. You, Monsieur Anorax, are one of those who can understand everything, even silence. I have no more to say. This is the first time you have spoken on this subject to me. Let it be the last, for I will not even listen to a second attempt. I retired. Our situation henceforth was critical. I related the conversation to my two companions. We now know, said Ned, that we have nothing to hope for from him. The Nautilus is approaching Long Island. Let us make our escape, no matter what the weather may be. But the sky became more and more threatening. Signs of a hurricane were not wanting. The atmosphere became white and misty. Delicate, cirri clouds were succeeded on the horizon by heavy cumuli. The low clouds passed overhead very rapidly. The sea got up and rolled in long, swelling waves. Birds with the petrels disappeared. The barometer fell rapidly and indicated extreme tension of vapors. The mixture in the storm glass melted under the atmosphere, now subcharged with electricity. The strife of the elements was at hand. During the 18th May, the storm burst. Just as the Nautilus was off Long Island, some miles from New York, I am able to describe the tempest. For by some unaccountable whim, Captain Nemo determined to brave it at the surface of the ocean instead of going beneath the waves. The wind was southwest, first pretty fresh, that is to say, about 15 yards in a second, which increased at a rate of 25 yards a second about 3 p.m. Captain Nemo, unmoved by the squalls, had taken his place on the platform. He was lashed round the waist to prevent his being carried away by the enormous waves. I managed to hoist myself up also, and made myself secure, dividing my admiration between the storm and the incomprehensible man who encountered it. The raging sea was swept by great ragged clouds which dipped into the waves. I could not perceive any of those small waves which were formed at the bottom of the great hollows of the billows. Nothing but long, rolling, compact waves which did not break. The Nautilus, sometimes on her side, and sometimes almost upright, rolled and pitched fearfully. About 5 o'clock rain fell in torrents, but neither the wind nor the sea abated. The hurricane blew at the rate of more than 45 yards a second, or about 40 leagues an hour. Houses are overturned by such gales as this, and cannon are frequently dismounted, but the Nautilus, in the midst of the tempest, justified the saying of a certain engineer, viz., This is no well-built hull that cannot defy the sea. She was not a resisting mass, which the waves might have overcome. She was a steel spindle, obedient, mobile, without masts or riggings, and which braved the fury of the waves. I studied these billows attentively. They measured nearly 45 feet in height, and from 150 to 175 feet in length, and the rate at which they traveled, less than the wind, was about 15 yards in a second. Their volume and force increased with the depth of water. I now understood the mission of these waves, which carry a quantity of air in their sides, and carry it to the bottom of the sea, where the oxygen it contains gives life. Their extreme forces have been calculated at 6,000 pounds on the square foot. Such waves as these at the Hebrides have displaced a block weighing 80,000 pounds, and in the tempest on the 23rd December 1864, overturned part of the town of Yedo in Japan, and going at the rate of about 500 miles an hour, broke the same day upon the shores of America. The storm with us increased during the night. The barometer fell to 7/10. Fell 7/10. In the evening I perceived a large ship on the horizon, laboring painfully. She appeared to be lying to, under half steam, and was probably one of the New York steamers from Liverpool or Havre. Darkness soon hid her from our sight. At 10 p.m. the sky was regularly on fire with lightning. I could not support the glare, which Captain Nemo, as he gazed at it, seemed imbued with the spirit of the storm. A mingled and terrible noise of the surging of the waves, the roaring of the wind, and the crashing of the thunder filled the air. The wind seemed to blow from all quarters, and the cyclone, first from the east, backed round again to it by the north, west, and south, in the inverse direction adopted by circular storms in southern seas. The Gulf Stream well deserved its name of the King of Tempests. These violent storms are caused by the differences of the temperature between the air and its current. The rain had been succeeded by a fiery shower. The drops seemed charged into lightning points. Captain Nemo seemed determined to court death by lightning, a worthy end for such a man. In its violent pitching, the Nautilus would raise the steel spur like a lightning conductor, and long sparks were given out by it. Bruised and exhausted, I crawled to the panel and descended to the saloon. The storm was then at its height, and it was impossible to stand up in the Nautilus. Captain Nemo came down about midnight. I heard the reservoirs filled, and the Nautilus sank slowly beneath the waves. From the saloon windows I could perceive great fish passing in the briny water, quite terrified, while some were actually struck by the lightning as I gazed. The Nautilus continued to descend. I fancied we could have reached calm water at a depth of 16 yards, but no, the upper waters were too rough, and we had to go down to a depth of 50 yards to seek repose. But what quiet, what peace and tranquility reigned there! Who could have imagined that such a fearful hurricane was raging at the surface of the ocean overhead? All right, we're between chapters, so I can chat a little bit. I'm doing well, Marius. Had a lot of allergies over the weekend, which were super fun, as I'm sure you can imagine. Yeah. I hope that your weekend went well. I know it's a bit past the weekend. Yeah. But, until I get better insurance, basically all I can do is, oh, nice. Well, still, pretty good making your first game. Ah, gotcha. Yeah. I know that there are some programs on Steam which can help you with making your own game. I think I have one. I don't remember what it's called, but I can try to figure it out and then post it on the Discord for you if you'd like. Oh, yeah. Fire is a very intricate thing. Even if you're just going for look alone and not like the sounds and stuff like that. Okay. Godot. I'm not familiar with that one. Yeah, later on I'll definitely look up the one that I was thinking of. And I think that there are communities on Steam as well for, making games from beginners to experts and stuff like that. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about your the game that you were trying to make. You can write all about it in the... Oh, yeah, I've heard of Unity. I haven't used it, though. You can write all about it in the chat, and I will read it at the end of this next chapter. I'm going to go ahead and continue reading for a bit. Chapter 20, from latitude 47 degrees 24 minutes to longitude 17 degrees 28 minutes. The tempest had driven us to the east. All hope of landing at New York or on the shores of the St. Lawrence had fled. Poor Ned Land, in despair, kept aloof like Captain Nemo, but Conseil and I were together continually. It would be more correct to state that the Nautilus had been carried to the northeast by the storm. For some days we wandered at the surface, sometimes beneath it, surrounded, when above, by those fogs so dreaded by sailors. The fogs are chiefly owing to the melting of the ice, which causes great moisture in the atmosphere. What ships are lost in these latitudes when attempting to ascertain their whereabouts on this dangerous coast? Numerous accidents are due to these thick fogs. The noise of the wind drowns the breaking of the surf, and ships go ashore helplessly. Collisions in spite of whistles and fog bells. The bottom of this sea looked like a battlefield where the conquered ones of ocean still lie as they fell. Some old and already covered up, some young and bright, reflecting the light of our lantern from bolts and copper sheathings. Okay, have fun working on it. But a number of ships have been lost, with all hands off Cape Race, St. Paul Island, Straits of Belle Isles, and in the estuary of the St. Lawrence. The Solway, the Isis, the Parramatta, the Hungarian, the Canadian, the Anglo-Saxon, the Humboldt, the United States, all foundered. The Arctic, the Lyonnaise, spraying leaks. The President, the Pacific, and the city of Glasgow disappeared from causes unknown. A funeral line along which the Nautilus glided as if it were holding a review of the dead. On the 16th of May, we reached the southern end of the Bank of Newfoundland. This bank is composed of organic matter, alluvial deposits brought from the equator by the Gulf Stream, or from the North Pole by the counter cold water current that washes the American coast. There also are formed those erratic blocks drifted along with a broken up ice. There is also a vast charnel house of fish, mollusks, or zoophytes, which perish by hundreds of millions. The depth of the sea is not great off Newfoundland, a few hundred fathoms only, but towards the south it dips suddenly to 3,000 yards. There the Gulf Stream widens out, it loses speed and temperature, but becomes a sea. Amongst the fish I noticed the Cyclopterus, the Murnac of large size and excellent taste, Carax with large dog-like eyes, blennies, gobies, etc., etc. The nets brought up a very hardy, bold, and vigorous fish, armed with spikes and prickly fin. A sea scorpion about 9 feet long, the determined enemy of blenny, gads, and salmon. We had some difficulty to lay hold of this animal. Maybe it is a nenial, which, thanks to the formation of its opercules, prevents its respiratory organs from the drying contact of the atmosphere, and can live for some time out of water, and I must not omit the codfish in its favorite waters on the inexhaustible Bank of Newfoundland. One may say that these cods are mountain fish, for Newfoundland is nothing but a submarine mountain. When the Nautilus cuts her way through their thick masses, Conseil could not help saying, "Ah, cod! I always fancied that cod were flat fish like dabs or soles." "Stupid," I said. "Cods are only flat at the fishmongers, where they are displayed opened and spread out. In the water they are rounded like mullet, and constructed perfectly for swimming." "I dare say," replied Conseil, "but what a quantity there are!" "And there would be a great many thousand more, but they have enemies, fishes and men. Do you know how many eggs there are in a female cod?" "Let me give a good guess," said Conseil. 500,000. 11 millions, my friend. 11 millions, exclaimed Conseil. "I cannot believe that unless I count them myself." "Well, count, Conseil, but the fish is taken in thousands by the French, English, Canadians, Danes, and Norwegians. They all consume enormous quantities, and were it not for the fecundity of these animals, the sea would soon be cleared of them. Thus, England and America alone have 5,000 ships manned by 75,000 sailors employed in the cod fishery. Each ship takes 40,000 at least, which gives a total of 25 million. It is the same on the coast of Norway." "Well," said Conseil, "I agree, and I will not count them." "Count what?" "The eggs. The 11 millions? But I will make a remark." "What is it?" "Merely that if all of the fish were hatched, 4 cod would be sufficient to supply England and America." During our inspection of the banks of Newfoundland, I could distinguish the long fishing lines armed with 200 hooks, which every boat throws over by dozens. The Nautilus had some trouble to escape this submarine network. However, we did not remain long in these crowded places. We went up the 42nd degree of latitude as high as St. John's and Heart's Content, where the Arctic cable emerges. The Nautilus, instead of continuing to the north, turned in an easterly direction, as if it wished to follow up the plane upon which the telegraphic cable is laid. It was on the 17th May, about 500 miles from Heart's Content, at a depth of 2,900 yards, that I perceived the cable lying on the ground. Conseil, whom I had not told of it, took it for the large sea serpent, and was about to class it as usual, but I undeceived him, and, to console him, gave him some particulars concerning the laying of the cable. The first cable was established during the years 1857 and 1858, but, after having transmitted about 4,000 telegrams, it stopped working. In 1863, another was constructed, over 2,000 miles long and weighing 4,500 tons, which was shipped in the Great Eastern. This attempt did not succeed. Now, the Nautilus, on the 25th May, was on the exact spot at which the breakage occurred, which ruined the enterprise. It was 638 miles from the Irish coast. At 2 p.m. they perceived that the communication was interrupted. The electricians determined to cut the cable before fishing for it, and at 11 p.m. they found the damaged part. They spliced it and resank it, but some days later it broke again, and in such deep water that it could not be recovered. The Americans were not discouraged. The brave Cyrus Field, the promoter of the undertaking, who had embarked all his fortune in it, started another subscription. It was well responded to. Another cable was made on better principles. The wires were wrapped in gutta percha, protected by a covering of hemp, and surrounded by a metallic skin. The Great Eastern sailed with it on the 13th July, 1866. The operation proceeded successfully, but an incident happened. It was remarked that nails were frequently found inserted in the cable with a view to injure it. Captain Anderson, his officers, and the scientific men held a consultation, and a notice was promulgated that if anyone were discovered as the author of such an action, he would incontinently flung into the sea. No further attempts to soil the cable was made. On the 23rd July, the Great Eastern was only about 500 miles from Newfoundland, when a telegram from Ireland apprised those on board of the armistice between Prussia and Austria after Sadowa. On the 27th, in thick fogs, they reached Heart's Content. The enterprise had fairly and happily succeeded, and the first telegram young America sent to Mother England were the grand words of so rarely comprehended. Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. I did not expect to find the electric cable in the same state as when it left the manufactory. The long serpent, covered with the debris of shells, was encased with a strong coating which protected it against boring mollusks. It lay undisturbed by the motion of the sea and under favorable pressure for the transmission of the electric spark which passes from America to Europe in 0.32 of a second. The duration of this cable will be almost indefinite for the gutta percha is improved by the salt water. Besides, on this well-selected level, the cable is never so deeply immerged as to break. The Nautilus went to its lower depth, situated 4,431 yards, and there it lay without any distension. We then arrived at the spot where the accident of 1863 happened. The ocean bed forms a large valley upon which Mont Blanc might be placed, without the top appearing above the water. This valley, so enclosed on the east by a perpendicular wall, more than 2,000 yards high. We arrived there on the 28th May, and the Nautilus was then only 120 miles from the Irish coast. Did Captain Nemo wish to reach the British Isles? No. To my great surprise, he again turned southward and to European seas. It rounded the Emerald Isle. I perceived Cape Clear for a moment, and then the Fastnet Lighthouse, which guides the thousands of ships bound for Liverpool and Glasgow. An important question presented itself to my mind. Did the Nautilus dare to enter the English Channel? Ned, who had reappeared since we sighted land, did not cease to inquire. How could I reply? Captain Nemo was still invisible to us. Having permitted the Canadian a glimpse of America, perhaps he was going to give me a look at France. But we went south still. On the 30th May we passed the Land's End, leaving the Scilly Islands, Scilly, Scilly Isles, to starboard. If Captain Nemo wished to enter the English Channel, he must now go east, but he did not. During the whole of the 31st, the Nautilus described a series of circles in the sea which puzzled me greatly. It seemed as if search were being made to find a spot difficult to hit on. At midday, Captain Nemo came up on the platform to take the position himself. He did not speak a word, and seemed more reserved than ever. What had made him so sad? Was it the proximity of the European shores? Had he some remembrances of this abandoned native land? This thought haunted me, and I began to think that I should soon, by a happy chance, discover the captain's secrets. Next day, the 1st of June, the Nautilus continued her maneuvers. It was evident from some precise spot was wanted. Captain Nemo came up, as on the previous day. The sea was calm, the sky clear. 8 miles off a great steamer trailed a line of smoke across the horizon. She showed no colors, and I could not ascertain her nationality. Captain Nemo took his sextant and began to observe the sun, some minutes before it reached the meridian. The absolute calm assisted his operation. The Nautilus did not move at all. I was on the platform at the time. When the observation had been completed, Captain Nemo merely said, "Here it is," and descended to his room. Had he seen the ship which had changed her course and now approached us? I could not tell. I returned to the saloon. The panel was shut. I heard the water entering the reservoirs. The Nautilus sank direct, for the screw did not move. A few minutes later, we were aground at 835 yards. The ceiling was lighted up, the windows were opened, and I could watch the sea brilliantly illuminated by our electric lamp for half a mile round. To port there was nothing but the watery expanse, but to starboard appeared a large mass which riveted my attention. It was like a ruin buried beneath white shells, as under a mantle of snow. Examining it attentively, I fancied I could distinguish a vessel, mastless, which must have foundered. The wreck must be an old one. Many years must have passed for it to have become so encrusted with the lime of the ocean. What was this ship? Why should the Nautilus visit its tomb? Was it a shipwreck in the ordinary sense? I did not know what to think, when suddenly, close by me, I heard the captain's voice. "That vessel," he said slowly, "was formerly called the Marseille. She carried 74 guns, and was launched at 1762. In 1778, commanded by La Poipe Bertrieux, she fought the Preston. On the 4th July, 1779, she was at the taking of Grenada with a fleet of Admiral Estang. On the 5th September, 1781, she took part in the action on Chesapeake Bay. In 1794, her name was changed by the French Republic. On the 16th April of the same year, she joined the fleet of Villaret-Joyeuse at Brest, charged to escort the convoy of corn to come from America under the command of Admiral Van Stabel. On the 11th and 12th Prairial of year 2, the squadron encountered the English fleet. Today, monsieur, is the 13th Prairial, the 1st June, 1868. 74 years ago this day, in this place, in 74 degrees 24, 47 degrees 24, sorry, I'm getting mixed up with this. In 47 degrees 24 minutes latitude and 17 degrees 28 minutes longitude, this ship, after a gallant fight, dismasted with a leak sprung, a third of her crew disabled, preferred to sink with her 356 sailors than to surrender, and nailing their colors to the poop, they disappeared beneath the waves, crying, "Vive la République!" "The Veigneur!" I exclaimed. "Yes, monsieur, the Veigneur. A good name." Or maybe it is Vengeur, murmured the captain as he folded his arms. Sorry, there was more stumbling. Chapter 21. A hecatomb. The style of address, the unexpected scene, this history of a ship of my country, so coldly told at first, then the emotion with which the strange individual had produced the last words, the significance of the name, Avenger, were all impressed deeply upon my mind. My gaze did not quit the captain. He, with outstretched hands, was watching with glittering eyes the glorious wreck. Perhaps I should never know who he was, whence he came, or whither he went, but I know that the man disengaged himself from the savant. It was no ordinary misanthropy that had caused Captain Nemo to hide himself with his companions in the Nautilus, but a hatred, whether monstrous or sublime, that time could not enfeeble. Did this hatred still demand vengeance? The future would disclose this. Meanwhile, the Nautilus rose slowly, and the confused forms of the Avenger disappeared by degrees. A slight rolling motion indicated our arrival at the surface. At that moment, a dull roar was heard. I looked at the captain. He did not stir. "Captain," I said, He did not reply, so I left him and mounted to the platform. Conseil and the Canadian had preceded me. "What is the meaning of that sound?" I asked. "It was a cannon shot," replied Ned Land. I looked toward the ship I had seen before. It had approached the Nautilus and was coming at high speed. It was 6 miles away. "What ship is that, Ned?" "Judging by her rigging and spars, I should say she is a man-of-war. I hope she may come up with us, and, if possible, sink this damned Nautilus." "Friend Ned," said Conseil, "what harm can she do to the Nautilus? Can she attack us under water?" "Tell me, Ned," I said, "can you see to what nation this vessel belongs?" The Canadian frowned, lowered his eyelids, and gazed for some seconds at the vessel earnestly. "No," he replied at length. "I do not know to what country she belongs. Her ensign is not at the perch, but I can swear she is a man-of-war because of the pennant at the main." For a quarter of an hour we continued to gaze at the approaching ship. I could not quite believe that she could have distinguished the Nautilus at such a distance, still less have guessed that she was a submarine engine. The Canadian soon informed me that the newcomer was a large man-of-war, a 2-decked ironclad ram. A thick black smoke escaped from her 2 funnels. Her sails were furled. She had no ensign. The distance prevented our distinguishing the colors of the pennant, which blew out like a long ribbon. She rapidly approached us. If Captain Nemo remained apathetic, here was our chance to escape. "Monsieur," said Ned Land to me, "when this vessel is a mile distant, I will throw myself into the sea, and I should suggest your doing the same thing." To this I made no reply, but continued to look at the vessel, which became rapidly more distinguishable. French, English, American, or Russian, she would receive us hospitably if we could only get on board. "Monsieur will remember," said Conseil, "that we have some little experience of swimming. He can rest upon me if he decided to follow Ned Land." I was about to reply when a puff of white smoke burst from the man-of-war. Some seconds later the water was splashed up by the fall of a heavy shot astern of the Nautilus. A little later the report came to our ears. "Hullo, they are firing at us!" I exclaimed. "Good men," murmured the Canadian. "They evidently do not take us for shipwrecked sailors," said I. "If monsieur has no objection—" "Good," said Conseil, as another shot ploughed up the water close to us. "If monsieur has no objection, I think they have recognized the narwhal and are cannonading it." "But they ought to see that there are human beings in question," I said. "Perhaps that is why they fired," said Ned, looking at me. A sudden idea struck me. No doubt they had formed their own conclusions respecting the pretended monster. Doubtless, on board the Abraham Lincoln, when the Canadians struck the narwhal with a harpoon, Commodore Farragut had perceived that it was in reality a submarine vessel more dangerous than a supernatural cetacean. Yes, this must be it, and in every sea they are now pursuing this engine of destruction. It was indeed terrible if, as we thought, Captain Nemo used the Nautilus in a scheme of vengeance. Did he not attack some ship that night in the Indian Ocean when we were imprisoned? Had not that man who was buried in the coral cemetery fallen a victim to the attack provoked by the Nautilus? Yes, it must be so. One portion of Captain Nemo's mysterious existence was developing itself. And if his identity were not established, at least the several nations had banded against him and now hunted him, not as a chimera, but as a man who had vowed an implacable hatred against them. All the terrible past rose up before me. Instead of meeting friends on board the attacking vessel, we should only find pitiless enemies. Meantime, the cannon shot kept flying about our ears. Some striking the water ricocheted and sank to a great distance, but none of them hit the Nautilus. The ironclad was then only 3 miles away, but notwithstanding the tremendous cannonade, Captain Nemo did not appear on the platform. And yet, had one of these conical shots struck the Nautilus, it would have been fatal. The Canadian then said, "Ought we not to endeavor to get out of this scrape? Let us make signals. They will perhaps understand that we are honest people." Ned Land took his handkerchief to wave to them, but scarcely had he opened it than he was struck down by an iron hand, and, notwithstanding his great strength, he fell upon the deck. "Wretch!" cried Captain Nemo. "Do you wish to be immolated on the spur of the Nautilus before it is hurled against yonder ship?" Captain Nemo, terrible to hear, was still more terrible to see. His face was pale as death, from a spasm of the heart which had for an instant ceased to beat. The pupils of his eyes were contracted. His voice did not sound. It was almost a roar that issued from his throat as he grasped the Canadian's shoulder. Then he turned from Ned Land toward the man-o'-war from which the shot showered round him. "Ah, you know who I am, you ship of a cursed race!" he cried in his powerful tones. "I don't want to see your colors to recognize your breed. Look here, I will show you mine." And he displayed a black flag similar to that which he had planted at the South Pole. At that moment a shot struck the Nautilus obliquely, and without damaging her, flew close by the captain and fell into the sea. He shrugged his shoulders, then addressing me, said, "Go below, you and your companions." "Monsieur," I cried, "do you intend to attack that ship?" "Monsieur, I am going to sink her." "You will not do that, surely?" "I will," replied Captain Nemo coldly, "and I advise you not to pass judgment upon me. Fate has shown you that you ought not to have seen. The attack has begun. The reprisal will be terrible. Go down." "What ship is this?" I asked. "Do you not know? So much the better. Her nationality, at least, is a secret to you. Go down." The Canadian, Conseil, and I had no choice. 15 sailors surrounded the captain, and seemed to regard the approaching vessel with intense hatred. We felt that the same spirit of revenge animated them all. I descended, and at that moment another shot hulled the Nautilus. I heard the captain cry out, "Strike, you mad vessel! Let fly your useless shot. You shall not escape the Nautilus, but you shall not perish here. Your wreck shall not mingle with that of the Avenger." I regained my cabin. The captain and the mate were still on the platform. The screw was put in motion. The Nautilus distanced her pursuer very quickly, and was soon out of range, but the chase continued, and Captain Nemo contented himself with keeping his distance. About 4 p.m. I could not restrain the impatience and restlessness that was consuming me. I went to the foot of the staircase. The panel was open. I ventured upon the platform. The captain was walking up and down in a very excited manner. He kept looking at the man-of-war to leeward, about 5 or 6 miles away. He was sailing round it and drawing the pursuit towards the sea. But he did not attack it. Perhaps he hesitated to do so after all. I wished to intercede once again, but I had hardly opened my mouth to Captain Nemo when he silenced me. "I am the law here. I am justice. I am the oppressed, and yonder is the oppressor. Through him I have lost everything I loved, cherished, venerated. Country, wife, children, father, mother, I have seen them all perish. All I hate is there. Be silent." I took a last look at the man-of-war, now steaming at high pressure, and then I rejoined Conseil and Ned. "We will fly this," I exclaimed. "Good," said Ned, "but what ship is it?" "I do not know," I replied, "but whatever it be, it will be sunk during the night. Better perish with it than be accomplices in a war of reprisal of which we do not understand the justice." "That is my opinion," replied Ned. "Let us wait till night." Night came. A deep silence reigned on board. The compass indicated that the Nautilus still held her course. I heard the rapid throbbings of the screw. We were still at the surface, and a slight roll affected the Nautilus. My companions and I had determined to escape so soon as the ship was sufficiently near to make ourselves heard or seen, for the moon, which was nearly at the full, shone brightly. Once on board the other ship, we could prevent the attack that threatened her, or at least do all that the circumstances admitted. Many times I thought that the Nautilus was ready to attack, but Captain Nemo was contented to let the chase approach nearer, and then the Nautilus would again increase her distance. The first part of the night passed without incident. We watched our opportunity. We spoke little, being too much excited to talk. Ned Land happened to throw himself into the sea. Hi, Corral. I was going to ask. I'll chat a little bit more at end of chapter. The first part of the night passed without incident. We watched our opportunity. We spoke a little, being too much excited to talk. Ned Land wanted to throw himself into the sea, but I persuaded him to wait. I thought the Nautilus would attack the ironclad at the surface of the sea, and then it would be not only possible, but easy to escape. At 3 o'clock, being restless, I ascended to the platform. Captain Nemo had not quitted it. He was standing up at the bow, near his flag, which was waving in the breeze over his head. He did not lift his eyes from the ship. His look was one of extraordinary attention, and appeared to attract, to fascinate, and to draw the pursuer along as if it were being towed. The moon was passing to the meridian. Jupiter was rising in the east. Amid this peace, heaven and the ocean rivaled each other in tranquillity, and the sea offered to the stars as lovely a mirror as had ever been presented for their reflection. And when I considered this holy calm of the elements, compared to the passions raging in the Nautilus, I felt chilled to the heart. The man-of-war was within 2 miles of us. It was approaching nearer and nearer to that phosphorescent gleam which betrayed the whereabouts of the Nautilus. I saw the lights, green and red, and the white lamp suspended to the mizzen stay. A sort of vibration seemed to make the rigging quiver, which indicated a very high pressure of working. Sparks flew up from the funnels and shone in the air like stars. I remained thus until 4 a.m., without Captain Nemo having perceived me. The ship was now 1.5 miles away, and at dawn the cannonade recommenced. The moment could not be far distant when, as the Nautilus attacked the ship, we could make our escape. I was about to descend when the mate appeared upon the platform. Several sailors accompanied him. Captain Nemo either did not see or did not wish to see them. Certain preparations for action were made. They were very simple. The railing round the platform was removed, and in the same way the lantern and pilot cages were lowered to a level with the deck. The surface of the long, cigar-shaped vessel did not offer a single obstruction to its free maneuvering. I returned to the saloon, the captain still on the water. The morning rays were beginning to penetrate the water. As the waves undulated, the gleam of the rising sun illuminated the windows. This terrible 2nd of June dawned. At 5 a.m. I perceived that the speed had moderated. I understood that the vessel was to be permitted to approach. Besides, the guns were heard more distinctly, and the shot hissed strangely through the morning air. "My friend," said I, "the time has come. A grasp of the hand, and may heaven preserve us." Ned Land was resolute, Conseil calm. I was nervous, and I could scarcely control myself. We passed into the library. As I pushed open the door leading to the central staircase, I heard the upper panel shut sharply. The Canadian hurried up the steps. I stopped him. A well-known hissing sound informed me that the water was coming into the reservoirs, and in fact, in a few minutes the Nautilus had sunk some yards under water. I understood it all. It was too late to act now. The Nautilus did not dare to attack the ironclad except below the waterline, where there were no iron plates to offer any resistance. We were again imprisoned, unwilling witnesses of the tragedy about to be performed. We had scarcely time to reflect even. Shut in my room, we gazed at each other without speaking. A profound stupor had settled upon my spirits. All throughout appeared to be arrested in my mind. All thought appeared to be arrested in my mind. I was in that state of tension which precedes some expected explosion. I waited. I listened. Every sense concentrated in the ears. The speed of the Nautilus increased. The rush was coming. The whole fabric trembled. Suddenly I uttered a cry. There was a shock, but comparatively gentle. I felt the penetrating force of the steel spur. I heard a scraping noise, but the Nautilus, carried onward by her immense power of propulsion, passed through the vessel like a needle through canvas. I could contain myself no longer. I rushed madly out of my room into the saloon. Captain Nemo was there, silent, gloomy, and implacable. He was looking through the port panel. An enormous mass overshadowed the water, and, as to lose nothing of the death agony, the Nautilus slowly sank to the abyss beside the ironclad. 10 yards off was the wounded vessel, into which the waves were pouring like a sluice, and beyond a double tier of guns and nettings. The deck was covered with moving black shadows. The water rose higher. The unhappy victims crowded into the shrouds, ascended the masts, or struggled in the pitiless water. Paralyzed with anguish, my hair grew stiff with terror, and my eyes dilated. I could not breathe. And there, breathless, voiceless, I was glued to the spot and gazed at the sight in horror. The enormous vessel sank slowly. The Nautilus following, watched all her movements. Suddenly an explosion occurred, and the confined air had blown up the decks as if by gunpowder. The agitation of the water heeled the Nautilus over. Then the ill-fated vessel sank more rapidly. The topmasts, covered with victims, appeared before us. Then the yards, bending beneath the weight of the crew. At length the main top-gallant mast came in sight. Then the dark mass disappeared, and with it the drowned ship's company dragged underneath by the powerful eddy. I turned to Captain Nemo, that terrible executioner, a true archangel of hate, kept steadily regarding his handiwork. When all was over, he went to his own room. I looked after him. On the wall, beneath the portraits of his heroes, I perceived the likeness of a young woman with 2 little children. Captain Nemo looked at them for some minutes, extended his arms to them, and, falling upon his knees, burst into a passion of sobs. So is work not working out for you, Corral? We're between chapters. I can chat a little bit. Yeah, I was thinking about it before I started Storytime today, wondering if I'd see you today and I could ask about it, because this is your second day, right, at your new job? Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be pretty rough. Man, I haven't taken longer than few weeks, I think. And that was about like 9-10 years ago was when I got hit by a car, and I had a really bad sprain, so I couldn't work for, it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks. And then going back was just strange. But yeah, a year would be really strange to return to. Well, sorry, it's, oh, nice. That'll be something to really look forward to. Yeah. I know a lot of people, they're so used to working that when they retire, they don't know what to do with themselves, but it seems like it would be, like, definitely the thing to retire. You seem to like that time of not working. I'm trying to think how I would do. I think, as long as I'm still doing the Storytime streams, I would be totally fine with it, but, oh yeah, I bet. Yeah, I don't know when my dad's going to retire, but he will, I think, enjoy it when he does. But my mom will be like, "What? Cool, you're retired? Let's go travel a lot." But yeah, he's more of a stay in one place homebody type of person. All right, I think are we at the last chapter? I'm going to double check. Okay, we have 2 more chapters to go. So I'm going to continue on for a bit. You can continue writing in chat. I'll read it at the end of the chapter. Chapter 22, The Last Words of Captain Nemo. The panels had been shut upon the dreadful spectacle, but no light had been given to the saloon. Darkness and silence now reigned in the Nautilus. We were leaving the desolation behind us at a tremendous rate, but whither were we flying? North or south? Did that man wish to escape the horrible reprisal? I re-entered my room, where I found Conseil and Ned sitting in silence. I experienced an insurmountable disgust for Captain Nemo. No matter how much he had suffered from mankind, he had no right to act as he had done. He had made me, if not an accomplice, a witness to his vengeance. It was too much. At 11 o'clock, light was given us. I entered the saloon. It was empty. I inspected the various instruments. We were going north at 25 miles an hour, sometimes at the surface, sometimes 30 feet beneath the waves. Taking the bearings on the chart, I saw that we were passing the mouth of the British Channel and were advancing rapidly toward the northern seas. I could scarcely see the various fish we passed, but it was not now a question of studying and classifying. In the evening we had crossed 200 leagues of the Atlantic. Evening came, and the sea would be dark till the moon rose. I regained my room. I could not sleep long. I suffered from nightmare. The horrible scene I had witnessed kept recurring to my mind. Who could now tell us what part of the North Atlantic Captain Nemo would take us? We still were traveling at speed, and in the midst of northern fogs. Should we go up to Spitzbergen or Nova Zembla, or explore those unknown seas, viz. The White Sea, the Sea of Kara, the Gulf of Obi, the archipelago of Liarov, and the equally strange coasts of the Asiatic continent? I could not tell. Clocks on board had been stopped, so we could no longer judge the flight of time. It seemed that day and night, as in polar regions, no longer followed in regular rotation. I felt I was being dragged into that wild region where the imagination can run riot, as in the mysterious tales of Edgar Allan Poe. At each moment I expected to see, like the fabulous Gordon Pym, that veiled figure of a size exceeding all inhabitants of earth. thrown across the cataract that defended the approach to the pole. I estimated, though perhaps I was mistaken, that this wild course of the Nautilus lasted 15 or 20 days, and how much longer it might have continued I do not know, had not a catastrophe brought our voyage to a conclusion. Neither Captain Nemo, the mate, nor any of the sailors ever appeared now. The Nautilus was almost always beneath the water. When it did rise to the surface to replenish the air, the panels opened automatically. The reckoning was no longer marked on the chart. I could not tell where we were. Moreover, the Canadian, who had come to an end of his strength and patience, kept aloof also. Conseil could not induce him to speak, and fearing in an excess of delirium, and under the influence of the terrible homesickness that devoured him, he would kill himself, he watched him untiringly. One can understand that, under all the circumstances, the situation was scarcely bearable. One morning, I do not know the date, I was sleeping heavily towards dawn when I awoke and found Ned Land leaning over me, and he said in a low voice, "We are going to escape." I sat up at once. "When?" I asked. "Tonight. All surveillance on board the Nautilus seems over. They all appear stupefied. You will be ready, sir." "Yes, whereabouts are we?" "Inside of land, which I observed through the fog this morning, 20 miles to the east." "What land is it?" "I do not know, but whatever land it may be, we will escape thither." "Yes, Ned, we will fly tonight, even should the sea swallow us up." "The sea is high and the wind is strong, but 20 miles in that light boat does not frighten me. I have succeeded in putting on board some food and water." "I will follow you," I said. "But," said the Canadian, "if I am surprised, I will fight, and they will perhaps kill me." "We will die together, Ned." I had decided. The Canadian left me. I gained the platform, upon which I could scarcely withstand the shock of the waves. The sky was threatening, but as we were so near land, we were obliged to make our escape. We must not lose a day, not an hour. I returned to the saloon, both hoping and fearing to meet Captain Nemo, wishing and yet not wishing to see him. What had I to say to him? Could I hide the horror with which he inspired me? No. Better not to find myself face to face with him. Better to forget him entirely, and nevertheless. What a long day this was, the last that I was to pass on board the Nautilus. I remained by myself. Ned and Conseil did not speak to me, for fear of betraying themselves. I dined at 6 o'clock, but I had no appetite. I forced myself to eat so as to keep up my strength. At 6:30, Ned Land entered my room and said, "We shall not meet again before we leave. At 10 o'clock, the moon will be up." Oh, thank you so much for the follow, Timber Wolf. I hope you're enjoying this. We're getting near the end. We have a chapter and a half left. Just quickly going to introduce myself. My name is Sunny, as you can see, and I specialize mostly in story time, but I also do some chill gaming. I do some art streams, and starting in a week and a half on my birthday stream. Oh, hi. That is my Discord, by the way. Ooh, very, how do you know me? Real life or watching other streams? I like the name Timberwolf the Wise. Oh, and all of my Storytime streams. Oh, okay. I gotcha. Yeah. Vampire. Nice. Well, yeah, Vampire is, I think, still in chat. Or, you are a vampire or you know me through Vampire. Or Corel. Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Was the other one not working, or are you just trying to get me more reviews? Which I totally appreciate. Yeah, my sister and I have a joint account, and she has her own account, so I know the, thank you. Yeah, let's see. Well, I definitely appreciate that. I don't know if you saw in the Discord, but on my birthday stream, which is probably going to be the 21st, because my birthday is the 22nd, I'm going to be starting Twitch Sings. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let me get back to it and let me find out where we were. Sorry about this. Oh, thank you. Yes, I will be entering my 4th decade. Okay. At 6:30, Ned Land entered my room and said, "We shall not meet again before we leave. At 10 o'clock the moon will not be up. We will take advantage of the darkness. Come to the boat in Conseil and I will await you there." The Canadian went out without giving me time to reply. I wanted to verify the course of the Nautilus. I went into the saloon. We were running north-northeast with tremendous speed at a depth of rather more than 50 yards. I took a last look at all the marvels of nature around the art riches heaped up in his museum. On this unrivaled collection, destined to perish some day at the bottom of the sea which had yielded it up. I wished to fix the impression upon my mind. I remained thus for an hour, beneath the light of the luminous ceiling, and, passing in review those beautiful specimens in the glass cases, then returned to my room. Then I donned some stout sea clothing and collected my notes and secured them carefully about my person. My heart beat loudly. I could not help it. My trouble and agitation would certainly have betrayed me to Captain Nemo. What was he doing at that moment? I listened at the door of his room. I could hear footsteps. Captain Nemo was there and had not retired to rest. At every moment it seemed to me as if he were about to appear and ask me why I was going to escape. I was nervously sensitive. My imagination magnified everything around me. This impression became so vivid that I began to think whether it would not be better to go into the captain's room, see him face to face, and beard the lion in his den. This was madness. Fortunately, I restrained myself and lay down on my bed to cool my agitation. My nerves became more calm by degree, but my brain was at work, and I seemed to see all over again the pleasant and unpleasant incidences that had happened since our disappearance from the Abraham Lincoln. The submarine shooting party, Torres Strait, the Papuan savages, our stranding, the Coral Cemetery, the Suez Passage, the island of Sautorin, the Cretan diver, Vigo Bay, Atlantis, the iceberg, the South Pole, the imprisonment in the ice, the octopus fight, the tempest in the Gulf Stream, the Avenger, and the last horrible scene of the vessel sent to the bottom with all hands. All these events passed before my mental vision like the scenes at a theater. Then Captain Nemo seemed to increase in size tremendously in the strange medley. His apparition forced itself in and took superhuman proportions. He was no longer my equal. He was the man of the waters, the genius of the seas. It was then 9:30. I held my head between my hands to still its throbbing. I shut my eyes and tried not to think. Another half hour. Half hour of nightmare would drive me mad. At that moment I fancied I'd heard the distant notes of the organ, a sad harmony, like the wail of a soul which longed to break its earthly bonds. I listened intently, scarcely breathing, plunged.
like Captain Nemo, in one of those musical ecstasies which led one beyond the limits of this world. Then a sudden idea terrified me. Captain Nemo had left his room. He was in the saloon, and I must cross it to escape. There I might meet him for the last time. He would speak to me, perhaps. A gesture of this could annihilate me. A word chained me to the ship forever. It was on the stroke of 10. The moment had come to leave my room and join my friends. It would not do to hesitate, nor fear that Captain Nemo should anticipate me. I opened the door of my room carefully, and yet it seemed to make a great noise as I opened it. Perhaps this noise only existed in my imagination. I then crept along the dark passage, pausing at each step to still the beating of my heart. I reached the door of the saloon and opened it very gently. The room was perfectly dark. The organ sounded faintly. Captain Nemo was there and had not seen me. I really believe that had there been light in the room, he would not have noticed me, so absorbed was he in his music. I crept along the carpet, avoiding the last contact that would have betrayed my presence. It took me fully 5 minutes to gain the door, which opened into the library. I was about to open it with when a deep sigh from Captain Nemo glued me to my place. I could perceive that he was rising from the instrument, for some rays of light filtered into the room. He came towards me with folded arms, silent, gliding like a ghost rather than walking. His bosom heaved with sobs, and I heard him mutter these words, the last I ever heard him speak. "Enough! Enough! Oh, Almighty God, enough!" Was this the effect of remorse, which thus escaped from the overladen conscience of the man? In a sort of despair, I precipitated myself into the library and rushed up the central staircase, and, following the upper turn, reached the boat. I entered it by the opening which had already given ingress to my 2 companions. "Let us be off! Let us go!" I cried. "In 1 second," replied the Canadian. The opening in the Nautilus was first closed and secured by Ned Land by means of a key he had discovered. The opening in the boat was likewise fastened, and then the Canadian began to release the screws which held us to the Nautilus. Suddenly a noise within the vessel was heard. Voices replied loudly. What had happened? Had our flight been discovered? I felt Ned Land slip a poniard into my hand. "Yes," I murmured. "We can die like men." The Canadian ceased working, but a word, repeated 20 times, a terrible word, revealed to me the cause of the agitation within the Nautilus. The crew was not troubling themselves about us at all. "The maelstrom! The maelstrom!" cried Ned. The maelstrom! No more terrible word and no more horrible situation than ours could be conceived. We were then in close proximity to the dangerous Norwegian coast. Had the Nautilus been drawn into the whirlpool just as our boat was about to quit the ship? It is well known that at flood tide, the waters pent up between the Loffoden and the Faroe Islands were precipitated together with tremendous violence and form a whirlpool from which no ship can escape. On every side of us, huge waves were rearing their crests and forming a gulf, which had been rightly called the navel of the ocean, whose power of attraction extends to the distance of about 12 miles round. There, not vessels only, but whales and even white bears from the northern regions met their doom. It was to this terrible fate that the Nautilus, whether designedly or not, was rushing. It was describing a circle, the circumference of which was gradually lessening, and the boat, which was attached to the side, was thus carried along with appalling speed. I got giddy. I felt that sensation which is produced by turning round for a long time rapidly. We were dreadfully alarmed. Horror had reached its limit. Circulation had ceased. Our nervous force was annihilated. We were bathed in a cold perspiration of agony. What a noise rose around us, roaring which the echoes repeated several miles away. The noise of the waves breaking upon the sharp rocks below, where the stoutest bodies are broken to pieces, where trunks of trees are worn away and become like fur, to use the Norwegian term. What a situation it was! We were tossed about like a cork. The Nautilus defended herself like a human being. The steel muscles were strained. Sometimes it rose upright, and we along with it. "We must hold on tightly," said Ned, "and see about the bolts. If we stand by the Nautilus, we may be saved yet." He was still speaking when a crashing noise was heard. The screws gave way, and the boat was hurled like a stone from a sling into the very center of the whirlpool. My head was struck by a piece of iron, and the violence of the blow deprived me of consciousness. Chapter 23. Conclusion. There was an end to our voyage under the sea. What passed during the night, and how the boat escaped from the terrible jaws of the maelstrom, how Ned Land, Conseil, and I ever came out of the Gulf alive, I cannot tell. When I came to myself, I was lying in a fisherman's hut in the Lofoden Islands. My two companions, safe and sound, were beside me, holding my hands in theirs. We embraced each other joyfully. We had no chance to return to France then. Communication between the north of Norway and the southern ports is rare. I was therefore obliged to wait for the starting of the steamboat, which plies bi-monthly from the North Cape. So now, amongst the kind-hearted people who have rescued us, I am revising these notes of our adventures. It is quite true. Not a fact has been omitted, not a detail exaggerated. It is the faithful narrative of this incredible expedition beneath the element inaccessible to mankind, but which progress will one day open up. Shall I be credited? I do not know. After all, it matters little. What I now declare is that I have a right to speak of those seas beneath which I have traversed 20,000 leagues in less than 10 months in a submarine tour of the world, which has revealed to me the wonders of the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the southern and northern polar seas. But what became of the Nautilus? Did it resist the maelstrom? Is Captain Nemo still living? Does he still exact his terrible reprisals? Or did he cease forever after that last hecatomb? Will the waves one day bring to land that manuscript which contains the whole history of his life? Shall I ever know the name of the man? Or will the missing vessel tell us by the fact of its nationality, that of Captain Nemo? I hope so, and I also trust that his powerful ship has overcome the maelstrom, and that the Nautilus survives where so many vessels have perished. If it be so, if Captain Nemo still inhabits the ocean, his adopted country, so to speak, may the hatred of that savage breast be appeased. May the contemplation of so many wonders calm the spirit of revenge in him. May the judge disappear and the savant continue his peaceful exploration of the sea. If his fate be a strange one, there is something sublime in it also. Have I not comprehended it myself? Have I not lived for 10 months of that unnatural existence? So to the question propounded 3,000 years ago by Ecclesiastes, who has ever sounded the depth of the abyss? 2 men only of all the world have the right to reply: Captain Nemo and myself. And now we have come to the conclusion of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So let's see, the next All Ages Storytime is going to be next Tuesday, 2 to 4. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to read. I do have a few different options, and I'll post a poll in Discord. So we have the fourth, fifth, and sixth books of the Wizard of Oz series. We have Robin Hood. We have King Arthur, kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. And then there is another Jules Verne one, but not nearly so technical, I guess you could say. It is Around the World in 80 Days. So, oh, okay. No problem. I mean, if you wanted to get caught up, of course, you know where my videos are, and I'm always glad to see you whenever you're able to get here. But let me very quickly, I'm going to see if somebody, like a certain person, is on. No, Mr. Multi is not on. So, let's see. I'm going to do a game stream now. I'm not really sure what game I am going to play. Snocking, stop it. She keeps trying to drink my tea. I apologize. So, let's see. I could play some more of the House of Da Vinci, which I've been playing after the Older Ages story time, because it has like that mystery feel to it. Yeah, can't. There's also Dark Side Detective. Oh ho, hey, I could play Chex Quest HD. Chex Quest is something that I sort of remember from my childhood. Do you remember when Chex came out with the video game? If you send in like a certain number of box tops, they'll send you the software for the game. So you're trying to protect against the soggies or whatever it is. Okay. What do you think? Should I do Chex Quest? Should I do the House of Da Vinci? Quest of Dungeons. That is the one where it's kind of like... well, I'll open up, I think, House of Da Vinci when I'm just going to end this stream so I can have like a clear end of the video for YouTube. But I will come back. Oh, okay, no problem. I'll go ahead and do House of Da Vinci. Yes, I'm going to do House of Da Vinci. So I'll be right back, and I will type in chat when to refresh the stream so that, yeah, I'll see you in a few minutes.